In the early 16th century, the Aztec Empire controlled much of central Mexico. Its capital, Tenochtitlan, was one of the largest cities in the world, home to perhaps 200,000 people. Yet within a generation, this empire had ceased. To exist, understanding why requires looking beyond the arrival of Spanish forces and examining the internal vulnerabilities that had developed over decades. The Aztec state depended on a system of tribute extraction that stretched across hundreds of communities. Subject cities were required to send food, textiles, precious materials, and labor to the capital on regular schedules. This system funded the empire's administration, fed its population, and supported its religious institutions. But it also created resentment. Many subject peoples viewed Aztec rule as oppressive, and loyalty to the empire remained shallow in outlying regions. Evidence suggests that by the early 1500s, this tributary structure was becoming harder to maintain. The empire had expanded rapidly in the preceding century, but further conquest was growing more difficult. Neighboring states, particularly the Tarascans to the west and the Tlaxcalans to the east, had successfully resisted Aztec control. Without new territories to exploit, the burden of supporting the empire fell more heavily on existing subjects. At the same time, Tenochtitlan's population had grown to a size that strained available resources. The city was built on an island in Lake Texcoco, and while the Aztecs developed sophisticated agriculture using raised fields called chinampas, food supply remained a persistent concern. The surrounding lake system was gradually shrinking due to natural silting and human modification. Maintaining the causeways, aqueducts, and agricultural infrastructure required constant labor and investment. The political structure of the empire also contained weaknesses. The Aztec state was not a centralized administration, but rather a network of alliances centered on three major cities: Tenochtitlan, Texcoco, and Tlacopan. This arrangement, known as the Triple Alliance, required ongoing negotiation and cooperation. Power was concentrated in the hands of the nobility and the priestly class. While commoners had limited influence over governance, historians point to signs of social tension between these groups in the years before Spanish contact. Religious obligations placed additional demands on the system. Aztec cosmology required regular ceremonies and offerings to maintain cosmic order, and these rituals consumed substantial resources. The practice of ritual sacrifice, while often exaggerated in historical accounts, did require a steady supply of captives, which in turn necessitated ongoing military campaigns. This created a cycle in which warfare became not just a tool of expansion, but a structural requirement of the state. When Spanish ships arrived on the Mexican coast in 1519, they encountered an empire that was powerful but also fragile. The newcomers brought with them diseases to which indigenous populations had no immunity. Smallpox, measles, and other infections spread rapidly through densely populated areas. Research indicates that epidemic disease killed a substantial portion of the population within the first few years of contact, disrupting agriculture, administration, and social order. But disease alone does not explain the empire's collapse. The Spanish were able to exploit existing divisions within the Aztec sphere of influence. Subject peoples who resented tributary obligations saw an opportunity to challenge Aztec dominance. The Tlaxcalans, longtime enemies of the Aztecs, allied with the Spanish and provided crucial military support. Other communities followed, viewing the conflict not as a foreign invasion, but as a chance to settle local grievances. The Aztec leadership struggled to respond effectively to these combined pressures. Communication across the empire became difficult as disease reduced populations and disrupted established networks. The tributary system began to fail as communities withheld payments or redirected resources to local defense. The empire's military, while experienced in traditional forms of warfare, faced unfamiliar tactics and weapons. Horses, steel, and firearms gave Spanish forces certain advantages, though indigenous allies provided the majority of the manpower in key battles. Tenochtitlan itself came under siege in 1521. The city's location, once a defensive strength, became a vulnerability when supply routes were cut. The siege lasted several months, during which hunger and disease weakened the population. When the city finally fell, it marked not just a military defeat, but the collapse of the administrative and economic systems that had sustained the empire. In the years that followed, Spanish colonial authorities built new structures of governance on the ruins of the old. But the indigenous population continued to decline dramatically due to disease and social disruption. By the mid-16th century, the population of central Mexico may have fallen by as much as 90% from pre-contact levels. The fall of the Aztec Empire illustrates how civilizations can be vulnerable, even at the height of their power. The empire's rapid expansion created dependencies and resentments that could not be indefinitely sustained. Environmental constraints. Limited growth, while political and social structures concentrated power in ways that reduced flexibility. When external pressures arrived in the form of disease and foreign contact, these underlying weaknesses became critical. The empire's reliance on a tribute-based economy meant that any disruption to collection networks had cascading effects throughout the system. Agricultural production, craft specialization, and urban maintenance all depended on this flow of resources. When subject communities began to withdraw their cooperation, the central administration lost the means to function effectively. The complexity that had enabled the empire's rise became a source of vulnerability when coordination broke down. Historians continue to debate the relative importance of different factors in the empire's collapse. Some emphasize the catastrophic impact of epidemic disease, while others focus on political fragmentation or military disadvantage. The historical record remains incomplete, and much about daily life and administrative function in the Aztec state is still uncertain. What seems clear is that the empire did not fall because of a single cause or a single moment. It declined through the accumulation of pressures, both internal and external, that overwhelmed its capacity to adapt. The tributary system, the concentration of population in vulnerable locations, the dependence on continuous expansion, and the rigid social hierarchy all contributed to a fragility that became apparent only when tested by crisis. The lessons from this collapse extend beyond one civilization, revealing patterns that appear across history when complex societies face compounding stresses, without the means to reform or respond effectively. The Aztec collapse was not inevitable, but it was the result of choices and structures that, over time, made the empire less able to withstand disruption and maintain the systems upon which millions of people depended for their survival and stability.